I really became interested in McLuhan. And here's something I don't often mention. I was in a master's program at the New School for Social Research. I wound up getting my master's in 1976, and my master's thesis was entitled Misunderstanding Media. And it was a really arrogant on my part criticism of McLuhan. Because although I had read McLuhan, you and I were talking earlier before about poetry, his writing is very poetic, and you have to really relax and give it a chance and open up to it. If you read it the way most students and academics do other work, just like, look, what's the point? Okay, you're going to be very frustrated. And so, I had read Understanding Media, but in the wrong way, and I just wasn't getting it. This was 1974, and so I wrote this thesis. I guess the people at the New School thought that made sense.
Very smart.
Yeah, and so I got my Master of Arts degree. Then I went a few blocks down the street to New York University to get my PhD. And this was in the media ecology program that Neil Postman had founded and was running. And Marshall McLuhan was one of the main people we read there. And finally, I guess you might say I'm a slow learner. Finally, in that program, I'm reading Understanding Media, I'm reading the Gutenberg Galaxy, and it's suddenly like a light goes off in my head. I'm saying, okay, I've been an idiot. Nobody has ever said anything about media the way that Marshall McLuhan has said it. And what he is saying is crucially important because he's tying it to our existence on this planet as a species.
I was interested in learning a little bit more about what you think discarnate translates into now.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, we can't see people through telephone or
Right.
radio. However, Facebook, Instagram,
Right.
they have perpetual images of a
Yeah.
profile photo
Yeah.
that represents a person.
Yeah.
So, how does that tie into?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, television is discarnate also. What's not discarnate is you and I right now are sitting together in a room. We can reach out and shake hands, right?
Yes.
See? One of the properties of being discarnate is right here in this room where you and I are talking. In order to get here, you have to physically get here, right? If you are in California or Beijing or Melbourne, Australia, it doesn't matter, and you want to be in this room, the only thing that you can do, the only way you can get here is to physically travel, hop on a plane, right? If somebody is watching something on television, if someone is watching something on YouTube, if somebody is having a telephone conversation, if somebody is texting, if somebody is sending email, if somebody is looking at a Facebook profile, if somebody is tweeting, all of those things are discarnate because you don't need any physical body. It can be a voice, it can be an image, and one of the great advantages of that is, and this taps into another one of McLuhan's concepts, the global village, which he talked about in 1962, the whole world becomes connected in this discarnate way.
So you don't feel that the word discarnate is a negative thing?
I'm glad you asked that. People often wrongly think, well, because anything with dis, like disease,
Yes.
discombobulated, disgusting. What does the word disgusting come from? Gusto, that means
Yes.
good. You talk about dis is the opposite. And you might think that therefore discarnate, there's something bad about it. The only thing that's bad about discarnate is you can't do certain physical things which you might want to do. So let's say right now, here in this interview, I would say, hey, you know what? I'm really in the mood for a chai latte, okay? And we're here in New York.
It's a good choice, by the way.
Yeah. We have not yet invented any kind of teleportation. We don't yet know how to basically send a cup of coffee through
Right.
the internet.
See, the way I was thinking about it, which is, well, now I think maybe an error, was that discarnate was almost some type of like object permanence, kind of evolved object permanence. That you would think, oh, that person isn't there, so neurologically you don't connect to the person as much as you would in person.
Yeah.
But do you think that the internet provides enough sensory input that you could actually recreate the same experience?
Not completely the same experience. If, as some critics claim, and I strongly disagree with them, a problem with the internet is that it is replacing face-to-face interpersonal interaction with online interaction, where you can't shake a person's hand, where you can't share a cup of coffee, where you can't do any of the physical things that we take for granted in real life. If it was the case that the internet and its interactivity was replacing that, then I would be very concerned. I mean, let's face it, then it would be the end of our species, right? Because you couldn't do any physical thing. Okay, but it's not the case. The fact of the matter is, here we are, you and I talking. I talk to my students in person. All of those are carnate experiences, not discarnate. And I spend hours and hours a day online. One does not take the place of the other. What the online option allows is, later tonight, we're doing this in the afternoon, later tonight, say 1 o'clock in the morning. I mean, there might even be a few restaurants that are open, but I'm not gonna get in my car and drive over to someone's house and then I'll knock on the door. Hey, how you doing? It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I thought I'd say hello, but if I see somebody online, or if there's somebody in Europe or California and they're on a different time zone, in a different time zone.
It's facilitated.
That's right. So discarnate actually increases human interactivity. It does not decrease it.
In a way, being removed from ourselves through the internet, right? Removed from each other, I should say, not so much ourselves. In some ways ourselves, but I'll get there later. And removed from each other, being all networked together and having immediate, responses and immediate impact. What is the, responsibility of just a general person? Because it used to be that, if you wanted to be a celebrity, you'd have to go through certain tiers of social, convention. And then once you got there, then you'd have paparazzi following you around. But now you can get a YouTube channel and something, a cat video, anything.
Right.
It's almost like we're living in like the gold rush, but the internet.
Yeah.
Gold rush.
I think that's great. I think one of the problems with our society before the internet, and it still exists, is that there were and are many, many, many more talented people in all kinds of ways. Artists, comedians, writers, singers, recording artists, you name it. There are many more of them, and I would include me in that too, us, than could get out to the public and the world. The Beatles were turned down by 25 different record companies before EMI took them. Just think about that. 25 companies, they come in with, I want to hold your hand. Hey, I'm sorry, guys, I just don't hear it. There was a poet, one of my favorite poets, I think it was back in the 1700s, Thomas Gray, wrote a poem, called Elegy in a Country Churchyard. And, he looks at this country churchyard, the poet, and says, many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of oceans bare, many a flower was born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness in the desert air. And what he's talking about, and later on he talks about who knows how many mute inglorious Miltons are buried here. What Gray was talking about is this incredible asymmetry between the talent that exists out there in the world and those who are fortunate enough to break through and so everyone could know their work. that asymmetry still exists, but the internet has opened that up, to a much greater way. So
I thought that this was a really interesting perspective from Dr. Levinson, that the internet has now served as an equalizer for people that want to gain exposure for their work. I mean, I'd really be interested in learning from creators that post their work regularly online. Do you find that these barriers that were previously very concrete, where you would essentially walk in somewhere, say, this is my work, and if that was the main or governing entity for that niche, and you were to be rejected, it would take some time for you to physically go back somewhere and, draft your work again, send it somewhere else, go somewhere else, or have the barriers just shifted to a different place? Despite the self-publishing boom, are they now just more abstract? Are the barriers just more political or trend-based? Or is it truly equal?
Look, I'm not a fan of Justin Bieber. I don't particularly listen to music, but I think it's good that he somehow he got onto YouTube and became a huge hit.
Gatekeeping, the way it's changed now, where everyone has access to creating a Kindle book or creating any type of medium, has made, let's say, the authority of the publishing industry a discarnate entity now?
It's weakened the authority of the publishing industry. It's still carnate in the sense that if you're talking about the traditional publishing industry, although they do publish Kindle books, notwithstanding the fact that a few years ago, Hachette Media and a lot of other traditional publishers, Simon Schuster, had a big fight with Amazon, and I sided with Amazon in that fight.
Right.
But the fact is they still are carnate, and that's fine. There's still a place for physical books. But what they were very late in realizing, and there are a lot of things that Amazon does that I don't particularly agree with, but I think in a very wonderful, revolutionizing way, they've changed the publishing landscape. So now you can go home tonight, and you're so inspired by this interview that you sit down and you just stay up all night and write a book, okay? Now, before the Kindle, what could you do with that book? You would have to know someone who knows a publisher, an agent. Who cares what their opinion is ultimately, right? Who's an agent? Just one person. Maybe they have good taste, maybe they don't. Same is true with the publisher. All that ultimately counts is the relationship between you, the author, and your reader and potential reader.
With this type of gatekeeping, everybody is a journalist. Everyone's a writer. So anyone with a phone can now, take a photo of something that recently happened. It sort of puts, the profession of journalism out a little bit, right? Or it has to keep them a little bit more accountable to what really happened. So nobody's playing the game of telephone through political systems.
Right.
So, it'd be interesting to know your point of view on how that translates into maybe that tetrad system that you mentioned, in a more abstract way. How does this replace and flip gatekeeping and authority figures? Because as young person, for me, it's very interesting to be kind of in this dualistic place, because I feel like I'm in the middle. I have a hierarchy that I was born with, where you're told go to college and do this and do that, and that still exists. But then there's this other area of life where things are blooming, and it's not that it's one or the other, but that point where they coexist is very difficult for me to find.
Well, I think that's an important thing to bear in mind. Now, I'll be happy to do a tetrad on citizen journalism versus traditional journalism, but let's first talk about what the tetrad is.
Absolutely.
So tetrad is Greek for four part. It's a four-part structure. And it was a way that McLuhan was able to tie together the impact of different technologies. So, for example, you can start anywhere. Anyone can start anywhere. Let's do a tetrad on radio.
Okay.
So the first thing that you look at with the tetrad is what does radio intensify, amplify, do more of that hadn't been done before. And obviously what radio does is it intensifies the voice, music, sound, broadcast across great distances. That's what radio is. Anyone can, do that and understand that. But then the analysis begins to get a little more interesting. The second part of the tetrad of this four-part system is what does radio obsolesce, something which had formerly been up front. And then this new technology comes along and basically pushes it away or pushes it out of, frontline prominence. That's pretty easy too with radio. To some extent, the rise of radio as an organ of news presentation pushed the printed press into obsolescence. Again, that's fairly obvious. The third part of the tetrad now, I think, begins to get very interesting because McLuhan says that as any new technology or medium amplifies something, obsolesces something else which had previously been amplified, it also retrieves and brings back into prominence something which once was prominent but had been itself obsolesced by something else which came along. So what does radio retrieve? Well, people always had eyes, but if you think about it, before writing, before printing, everything was acoustic. The way that in the ancient world, most people were illiterate in the ancient world, and with the slight exception of Alexandria and the ancient library of Alexandria, they had a very robust culture. I read somewhere as many as 40 to 50%, even 70% of the population was literate, women as well as men, but they were the exception. Most people in the ancient world couldn't read. They could see, but they couldn't read. So how did they get their information? Through their ears. In Rome, there were no newspapers, but you had a town crier who basically broadcast the news literally through his voice. So what radio does is it retrieves the spoken word, which itself had been eclipsed by the written word.
Right.
And finally, and this is the most interesting and I think exciting part of the tetrad, McLuhan asked, what happens when this new medium itself has run its course, meaning it's been around for a while, people have become accustomed to it, people have adopted it, have internalized it. So radio was part of everyone's life. But like all media, it was subject to evolution. And by the end of the 1940s and into the 1950s, a new medium had arose, a medium which itself obsolesced radio. McLuhan called this, he had various names for it, the flip, reversal, and the reason that he was using those terms is this new medium which comes along as the dominant medium has sort of permeated all the culture, also pulls into its orbit things that people did in the past. So it sort of retrieves from obsolescence some of the qualities of what was obsolesced. So what does radio reverse or flip into? You tell me. Yes, exactly.
But you've written a bit about light through, just,
Yeah.
being able to
Right.
And I think that sort of poses a little bit of interactivity on
Yes.
subconscious,
Yes,
but also conscious level, because
Yes.
the viewer typically is staring right back at him.
that's right. McLuhan was very attuned to the various conduits to our brain. That is, the various ways that things that are out there get inside here. So, ears are one way. And ears are very interesting. Sound is very significant because it actually causes our eardrums to vibrate. If someone whispers in your ear, that's a sensual experience because you're the eardrums are actually vibrating. And what happens is the eardrums vibrate and they register that vibration on the acoustic nerve, and that goes right into the brain, and that's how we recognize it. Eyes don't vibrate, but eyes are profound in a different way. The light that comes into our eyes, depending upon what that light is, registers on our brain in a different way. And so light through, which indeed is what television is, through the blue sky. You look up at the blue sky, it's light shining from behind the sky, the sun out in space, and that's why the blue sky is so attractive. Stained glass windows, neon lights, all of those are light through. Most things are not light through. Most things are light on, meaning right here in this room there's light shining on us, there's a table. What we see on that table, the light bouncing off it is light on. So yeah, that's one of the reasons also why television became so important.
You know, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. I've been thinking a lot about, your writing, McLuhan's writing, and just a little bit more about, it almost seems as though with every piece of technology, we're kind of, putting back together what you had mentioned earlier, right? Which it honestly escapes me.
Yeah.
Acoustic experience, something of this sort, right?
Yeah.
Just being able to take everything in simultaneously.
Yeah, that's right.
So, something I had a question about was, this is very philosophical, so
Okay.
perhaps it's a little too crazy.
Okay.
But I was thinking about how this applies to identity, because now when people go online, their identity is on there. It's no longer I'm going to go check out Bloomingdale's, or I'm going to go check out Macy's because I like that brand. Now we have this interesting phenomenon of self-branding, of identity, and so something I was interested in learning about in relation to technology being an extension of ourselves is, if those are extensions of ourselves and we're putting those sensory pieces together to go back to the acoustic experience, then in a way is that sort of us forming an identity. That makes almost the technology just not even necessary. It's just there to show us where we were.
Right.
Is that ridiculous?
No, it's not ridiculous at all. But what I thought you were heading
Yes.
is, prior to the digital age, prior to the web, we human beings have always been concerned about our identity and how we come across to the general public and the people that we interact with. But what was the only way that we could establish our identity? I guess our clothing, and in terms of our conversation and how we wear our hair. And traditionally, throughout human history, people have been very, very concerned about that. Another great advantage of the internet and the acoustic space that it gives us, meaning everything at once.
Yeah.
And by the way, to be clear about that,
Yeah, I would like to elaborate.
what does acoustic space mean? Well, visual space requires us to look at something. So right now, I'm looking at you. I can't see much else in the room. I mean, in the periphery of my vision, I can sort of see, but basically, I'm looking at you. If I want to look over there, I see there are some nice lights. There's like a bicycle on the wall. So I'm looking at that nice piece of art, but I'm no longer looking at you. In other words, vision, visual space, the eye is incredibly possessive, monopolistic, whatever word you want to use to indicate that it doesn't let you do more than one thing. Yeah. We don't have eyes in the back of our head. So, if we hear something, back of our head, we have to turn around and say, what is that? But I just said if we hear something. Our ears and acoustic space is very different. If you were to turn your head around, if you were to close your eyes, you would still hear me exactly the same as you're hearing me now. And, you know, our ears are always in touch with every part of the environment in a way that our eyes are not. And this, by the way, is one reason why radio survived television, because there was still a need for that kind of contact. So just a little more on that. If you think about it, I mean, I realized a long time ago, we can't close our ears, right? I mean, we can put our fingers in our ears. I mean, that doesn't, you can put our hands over our ears, but it doesn't work all that well. Closing our eyes, very easy. We close our eyes every night when we go to sleep, right? When we're sleeping. You know, because we want to shut out the visual world, right? It would be hard to sleep if we're seeing the visual world. As a matter of fact, when we're sound asleep, our eyes don't even work, right? If someone were to open up someone's eyes, you know, like a doctor or something, and the person were unconscious, they wouldn't see anything. You know, the eye doesn't work. Of how our ears are constantly, you know, at our service. And they're always up for sensory input.
So acoustic space is always there, omnipresent, and that's the main element.
Yes, that's right. And it's always there, and it doesn't matter whether it's visual or oral or acoustic. The way McLuhan and I and other people use it is it talks about the properties of sound vis-a-vis our ears, but other things like images can have acoustic properties.
So now that makes me think of the journalism day.
Right, let's get back to that.
If, you know, people, general, you know, regular Joes out there
Right.
have a phone and they're carrying their extension of themselves with
Right.
So then if they document something, then they are essentially kind of like the eyes of society.
Yeah. First of all, the tetrad goes back to the story I was telling you earlier. I'm now a doctoral student in Neil Postman's program, the media ecology program at New York University. In fact, I've been there a year or two. I'm already working on my doctoral dissertation, which will be called Human Replay, a Theory of the Evolution of Media. And by the way, it has not one, but 2 chapters on McLuhan. That's how important I thought McLuhan was. Anyway, one day, I go into NYU and up to Neil's office. And Neil liked to smoke, and like Neil sitting at his desk would be, one hand like this, another hand like with a cigarette dangling, the smoke going out of it. I mean, I wish I had a cell phone then. I would have taken a picture of that. You know, but you know, on this day, his brow was even more wrinkled than usual. And I see he has like a paper on his desk in front of him, not a newspaper, a paper that I figured, you know, some student wrote or whatever. Oh, God. So I say, what's the matter, Neil? And he says, I don't know, you know, see if you can make any sense of this. And he gives the paper to me, and he said, I can't understand what, you know, what the point of this is. And the first thing I see on the front page is The Laws of the Media by H. Marshall McLuhan, which is how he signed some of his work. Even though he's known as Marshall McLuhan, his full name was Herbert Marshall McLuhan, and he sometimes liked to go with the H. Marshall McLuhan business. I don't know why exactly. I like just using my name all the time. So the girl who didn't pay any attention to me in 7th grade, when she walks into a book, says, oh yeah, you know, I should have laughed at his jokes or whatever. But, so I'm looking, I said, oh my God, this is, you know, paper by Marshall McLuhan. I couldn't believe it. I'm reading it, it's on the tetrads. I said, and again, you know, maybe it was a good day for me, or I probably would have understood it in any day, right? Because it was so clear and brilliant. And I said, Neil, this is, you know, a 4-part system that McLuhan came up with. And so that was my introduction to the tetrad. Neil asked me to write a preface for it because he wanted to publish it in the journal, etc., which he was then editing. Neil, without telling me, sent my preface up to Marshall McLuhan. I thought my young career was finished, but when I sent McLuhan a couple months later, he was pretty happy with what I wrote. In fact, I got to tell you just one other story before I tell you about the tetrad. Yeah, 3 or 4 months later, McLuhan came down to New York University to give a talk. At New York University, in its vast intelligence, they knew that everybody would want to come see McLuhan, and the auditorium only seated, 300, and they also knew that people would want to meet one-on-one with McLuhan.
Right.
So what they did is they took everybody in the communications department's name, so they claim, put it like, in a big container, shook it like a big basket, and pulled out like 5 names of people who would be able to meet McLuhan. Everyone in the media ecology program would be able to see him in the 300 seat auditorium. No, my name wasn't there. So by this point, McLuhan and I were talking on the phone where, we're not sending email, we're sending regular mail. I have a whole bunch of correspondence. So I'm talking to him on the phone, and this is where McLuhan said, "Hey, Paul, how you doing? As you know, I'll be in New York next week. They're arranging some kind of individual meeting with me and some of the students. I assume you'll be there."
Wow.
And I said, no. He said, "Oh, really?" And I explained to him this, basket, pulling names like a lottery. So he didn't say anything then. Anyway, I wasn't at that meeting. Then, that evening, he's talking. It fit 300. There were like 400 people hanging out from the rafters. And McLuhan's up there talking, blah, blah, blah. And he starts talking about the tetrad. And he said, "And I just want to say, I came up with the tetrad, but there's a scholar here at New York University who really understands it." And I'm sitting next to Neil Postman, and he's thinking that McLuhan's going to say, "Neil Postman." And, And McLuhan says, "Yes, and I unfortunately didn't get a chance to meet with him this afternoon, but I just want to acknowledge now Paul Levinson." It was a really, really sweet moment. Yeah, so, we really did become friends, and, he died, he was like 69 years old, he died in 1980.
Isn't it ironic?
Yes. Just at the door of the digital revolution.